The rain drummed against the ancient windows of Buckingham Palace as the nation held its breath. For weeks, whispers had echoed through the corridors of power. Speculation had filled every newspaper headline, and the British people had waited with growing anxiety. What would their king say when he finally emerged from his medical ordeal? Behind those palace walls, a decision that would reshape the very foundations of the monarchy was about to be revealed. The announcement would not just shock the Commonwealth, it would rewrite history itself. Some called it the most significant royal declaration since Edward VIII's abdication. Others whispered it was long overdue. As the king's private secretary adjusted the microphone one final time, nobody could have predicted that the next few minutes would transform not just the crown, but the lives of millions across the globe. The weight of a 1,000-year-old institution rested on words that were about to be spoken, words that had been carefully chosen during those quiet nights in a hospital ward. This is the story of how a health scare became a catalyst for the most revolutionary change in modern royal history, and how one man's brush with mortality led him to make a decision that would echo through generations. The black Bentley moved slowly through the palace gates as photographers pressed against the barriers, their cameras clicking frantically. Inside the vehicle, King Charles III sat quietly, his fingers drumming against the leather seat. 3 weeks had passed since his admission to the London clinic, 3 weeks that had felt like a lifetime to both him and the nation that watched his every movement. The medical procedure had been successful, his doctors assured him repeatedly. The enlarged prostate that had caused such concern was now properly treated. Yet something had changed during those long nights in the sterile hospital room, something far more significant than his physical recovery. The king had been forced to confront his own mortality in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating. Dr. Sarah Matthews, his lead physician, had been blunt about the reality of his condition. Not life-threatening, she had explained, but a reminder nonetheless that even kings were subject to the frailties of human flesh. Those words had echoed in his mind as he stared out at the London skyline from his hospital window, watching the city continue its relentless pace while he remained still and contemplative. The Queen Consort, Camilla, had visited every day, bringing with her updates from the outside world. The government continued to function smoothly under Prime Minister Sunak's guidance. Prince William had stepped up admirably, taking on additional royal duties with the grace and competence that made Charles proud. The Commonwealth nations had sent messages of support that filled several binders, each one a reminder of the vast network of relationships and responsibilities that came with his crown. But it was during the quiet evening hours, when the nurses had completed their rounds and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, that the king found himself wrestling with questions that had haunted him for decades. What legacy would he leave? How could he use the remaining years of his reign to make a meaningful difference? The weight of tradition pressed against his desire for progress, creating a tension that had only grown stronger since his coronation. His eldest son had visited on the second week, arriving discreetly through a service entrance to avoid the media circus that surrounded the hospital. William had looked tired. Charles noticed the strain of additional responsibilities evident in the lines around his eyes. They had spoken about many things during that visit. The children, Catherine's ongoing recovery from her own health challenges, the endless stream of royal engagements that demanded attention. It was during that conversation that William had said something that would prove to be a turning point. Perhaps, his son had suggested gently, "This experience is trying to tell you something important." The words had been spoken without calculation or ambition, simply the concern of a son for his father. Yet they had planted a seed that would grow into something much larger. The hospital chaplain, Reverend David Henderson, had become an unexpected confidant during those reflective days. A man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner, he had a way of asking questions that encouraged deep thought rather than easy answers. During one of their conversations, he had posed a question that Charles found himself returning to repeatedly. "Your Majesty, if you knew you had limited time left to make a lasting impact, what would you choose to do with it?" The question had seemed almost prophetic given the announcement Charles was now preparing to make. He had always been passionate about environmental issues, social justice, and modernizing the monarchy for the 21st century. Yet the constraints of royal protocol and the weight of centuries of tradition had often felt like chains around his ambitions. The hospital stay had given him time to consider what really mattered, not just for the monarchy, but for the world his grandchildren would inherit. His private secretary, Sir Edward Young, had been remarkably supportive when Charles first broached the subject of his planned announcement. A career civil servant with an impressive understanding of constitutional law, Sir Edward had initially raised numerous concerns about the precedent such a decision would set. However, as they discussed the details and implications, he had come to understand the vision behind the king's thinking. The constitutional implications were significant, requiring careful consultation with the Prime Minister, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the leaders of the Commonwealth realms. Each conversation had been delicate, requiring Charles to articulate not just what he intended to do, but why such a step was necessary for the future of the monarchy. The responses had been mixed, some enthusiastic, others cautious, and a few openly concerned about the disruption such a change might cause. Prime Minister Sunak had been particularly thoughtful in his response. As someone who had risen to power through his own hard work and determination, he understood the complexities of leadership in the modern world. Their conversation had lasted nearly 3 hours, covering everything from the immediate practical implications to the long-term historical significance of such a decision. By the end, Sunak had offered his cautious support, recognizing that the monarchy needed to evolve to remain relevant. The international response had been equally varied. President Biden had called personally to express his support, sharing his own experiences with health scares and their ability to clarify one's priorities. The president of France had been more reserved, concerned about the precedent such a decision might set for other European monarchies. The leaders of the Commonwealth realms had each responded according to their own political situations and relationships with the crown. Throughout these conversations, Charles had been struck by how many people seemed to have been waiting for exactly this kind of leadership. The world was facing unprecedented challenges: climate change, economic inequality, political polarization, technological disruption. Traditional institutions were being questioned and reimagined everywhere. Perhaps it was time for the monarchy to lead by example in adapting to these new realities. The media speculation during his hospital stay had been intense, but largely focused on his health and the immediate implications for royal duties. Very few commentators had guessed at the true nature of what he was planning. The palace press office had done an excellent job of managing information flow, providing regular updates on his medical condition while keeping the larger story completely confidential. Lady Susan Hussey, one of his most trusted advisors and a veteran of royal protocol, had been instrumental in helping him think through all the ramifications of his decision. Her decades of experience had taught her to anticipate problems before they arose, and she had compiled a comprehensive list of potential challenges and opportunities. Her support for his plan had been crucial in giving him the confidence to proceed. The king's personal faith had also played a significant role in his decision-making process. As the supreme governor of the Church of England, he took seriously his spiritual responsibilities alongside his temporal ones. The hospital chaplain had helped him explore how his planned announcement aligned with his Christian beliefs about service, sacrifice, and stewardship. The conclusion he had reached was that sometimes the most faithful thing a leader could do was to step aside and make room for new approaches. His relationship with his younger son Harry had been another factor in his thinking. The rift that had developed over the past few years had been a source of genuine pain for Charles. While he couldn't solve all their family's problems with a single announcement, he hoped that his decision might open new possibilities for healing and understanding. Harry's own struggles with royal life had highlighted the need for change within the institution. The environmental movement that had been Charles's passion for over 50 years would also benefit from his announcement. By freeing himself from some of the constraints of traditional royal neutrality, he would be able to speak more forcefully about the urgent need for action on climate change. The younger generation, including his own grandchildren, deserve a leader who could advocate boldly for their future. As the Bentley approached the palace's main entrance, Charles could see the crowd of reporters and photographers that had been gathering since dawn. In a few hours, he would face them directly and share news that would dominate headlines around the world. The announcement he was preparing to make would shock many, inspire others, and certainly change everything. The weight of history sat heavily on his shoulders as he prepared to enter the palace that had been home to British monarchs for centuries. Soon, he would add his own chapter to that long story, one that future historians would debate and analyze for generations to come. But first, there were final preparations to make, family members to inform, and a speech to deliver that would alter the course of the monarchy forever. His personal protection officer opened the car door, and King Charles III stepped out into the gray London afternoon, ready to change the world. The state rooms of Buckingham Palace buzzed with quiet activity as the king's closest advisors gathered for what they knew would be a historic meeting. Charles had requested this assembly of his most trusted confidants, understanding that the announcement he was preparing to make would require careful coordination and absolute discretion. The gravity of the situation was evident in every face around the polished mahogany table in the 1844 room. Sir Edward Young sat at the king's right hand, his usually immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of the stress he had been under since first learning of his monarch's intentions. As private secretary to the king, he had spent the past week working around the clock to ensure that every constitutional requirement would be met, every protocol followed, and every possible consequence considered. The thick folder in front of him contained correspondence with government officials, legal opinions, and detailed timelines that would need to be executed with precision. Lady Susan Hussey occupied her familiar place at the table, her decades of service to the royal family evident in her calm demeanor, despite the unprecedented nature of their gathering. She had served as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth II for over 60 years, and had witnessed every major royal crisis and celebration during that time. Her perspective was invaluable, particularly her ability to anticipate how the British public and the international community would react to such momentous news. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, had arrived an hour earlier for a private consultation with the king. As the senior bishop of the Church of England, his blessing was crucial for any major decision that might affect the spiritual dimensions of the monarchy. Their conversation had been frank and sometimes challenging, touching on questions of duty, service, and the nature of divine calling. The Archbishop's eventual support for the king's decision had been hard-won, but genuine. Simon Case, the cabinet secretary, represented the government's interests at the table. His role was to ensure that the constitutional machinery would function smoothly regardless of the personal decisions made by the monarch. The careful balance between crown and parliament that had evolved over centuries would need to be maintained even as both institutions adapted to new circumstances. His presence underscored the seriousness with which Downing Street was treating the situation. Princess Anne had been the first member of the royal family to learn of her brother's intentions, and her reaction had been characteristically direct. Known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties and her deep understanding of the institution's strengths and weaknesses, she had asked pointed questions about the timing, the implications, and the long-term strategy. Her eventual support had come with conditions and suggestions that had helped shape the final form of the announcement. The Queen Consort sat quietly at the far end of the table, her expression thoughtful as she listened to the detailed discussions about logistics and timing. Camilla had been Charles's closest confidant throughout this entire process, offering both emotional support and practical wisdom. Her understanding of public relations and her genuine affection for the British people had helped her husband refine his message to ensure it would resonate with ordinary citizens rather than just constitutional experts. Prince William had been informed of the decision only 2 days earlier, and his response had been a mixture of surprise, concern, and ultimate understanding. As the heir apparent, he would be directly affected by any changes to the monarchy's structure and approach. His conversation with his father had been emotional and honest, touching on subjects they had rarely discussed so openly. The weight of future responsibility that would shift to his shoulders was something both men understood intimately. The king's speechwriter, Rebecca Deacon, had worked tirelessly to craft words that would convey both the magnitude of the decision and the hope that inspired it. Every sentence had been carefully considered, every phrase tested for its potential to inspire rather than alarm. The speech needed to acknowledge the unprecedented nature of the announcement, while reassuring the public that the monarchy itself remained stable and committed to service. Lord Reed, the President of the Supreme Court, had provided crucial legal guidance about the constitutional implications of the King's planned announcement. The British system of government relied heavily on precedent and tradition, but it also possessed a flexibility that allowed for evolution when circumstances demanded it. His opinion had helped clarify which aspects of the King's plan would require formal legislation and which could be implemented through royal prerogative. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, had joined the meeting to discuss security implications. Any major change in royal protocol would require adjustments to protection arrangements, crowd control measures, and threat assessment procedures. The announcement would likely generate significant public interest and potentially some controversy, requiring careful planning to ensure everyone's safety. Dame Melanie Dawes, the permanent secretary at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media, and Sport, represented the broader government apparatus that supported royal activities. Her department would need to coordinate with multiple agencies to ensure that the practical implications of the King's announcement could be implemented smoothly. The media strategy alone would require unprecedented cooperation between the palace and various government departments. As the morning meeting progressed, each advisor contributed their expertise to refining the final plans. The Archbishop raised concerns about the theological implications of certain aspects of the announcement, leading to lengthy discussions about the relationship between spiritual and temporal authority. Lady Susan Hussey shared insights from her conversations with senior members of the Commonwealth, several of whom had expressed both curiosity and caution about potential changes to their constitutional arrangements. Sir Edward Young presented a detailed timeline that would coordinate the announcement with briefings for key stakeholders. The Prime Minister would be informed just hours before the public announcement, followed quickly by the leaders of the major political parties, the Commonwealth Governors-General, and senior religious leaders. The goal was to prevent leaks while ensuring that those who needed to respond publicly would have adequate preparation time. The question of timing had been particularly complex. The King's health had improved significantly, removing any concern that his announcement might be seen as driven by medical fears rather than careful consideration. The parliamentary calendar needed to be considered, as did upcoming international summits and royal engagements that might be affected. They had settled on a date that would allow for proper preparation while not delaying unnecessarily. Princess and had been particularly focused on the implications for working members of the royal family. The changes her brother was contemplating would affect the distribution of royal duties among the remaining active royals. She had volunteered to take on additional responsibilities, despite her already extensive schedule, demonstrating the family's commitment to maintaining their service to the nation regardless of structural changes. The financial implications had required extensive analysis by the keeper of the privy purse. Any changes to the monarchy's operations would need to be budget-neutral or cost-saving, particularly given the economic pressures facing ordinary British families. The announcement would need to demonstrate fiscal responsibility alongside visionary leadership. International reactions had been carefully considered through conversations with British ambassadors around the world. The monarchy's role in British soft power was significant, and any changes would need to enhance rather than diminish the UK's international standing. Early informal soundings had suggested that many foreign governments would view progressive changes to the monarchy as evidence of British adaptability and forward thinking. The media strategy had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of the preparation. The King's announcement would generate global attention, requiring coordination between the Palace Press Office, government communications teams, and international media outlets. Rebecca Deacon had prepared supporting materials that would help journalists understand the historical context and constitutional significance of the announcement. Dame Melanie Dawes had raised important questions about the digital age implications of the king's decision. Social media would amplify reactions instantly and globally, requiring real-time monitoring and response capabilities. The palace's traditional approach to communications would need to be supplemented with more agile and responsive methods appropriate to the modern information environment. As the afternoon planning session continued, the king himself took an increasingly active role in addressing concerns and refining details. His vision for the announcement had evolved through these discussions, becoming more comprehensive and better grounded in practical reality. The support of his advisors had given him confidence that his decision, while unprecedented, was both constitutional and beneficial. The security briefing had revealed the need for enhanced protection arrangements, not just for the king himself, but for other family members who might face increased scrutiny. The public's reaction was impossible to predict completely, requiring contingency plans for various scenarios. Sir Mark Rowley had assured the gathering that his officers were prepared for any eventuality. By evening, the final details had been settled. The announcement would take place in 3 days, allowing time for final preparations and stakeholder briefings. The king would address the nation from the throne room, with the speech broadcast live across all major networks. Supporting statements would be released simultaneously by Downing Street, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and several Commonwealth governments. As the advisors departed, each carrying their specific responsibilities for the next crucial days, the king remained in the 1844 room with Camilla. The weight of decision was behind them now. Ahead lay the challenge of implementation and the hope of transformation. The queen consort reached across the table and took her husband's hand, understanding better than anyone the courage required for what was to come. The palace settled into its evening quiet, but the energy of preparation continued. History was about to be made, and everyone involved understood their role in ensuring that the announcement would mark the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of an old one. The monarchy was about to demonstrate its greatest strength, the ability to adapt and evolve while maintaining its essential character and commitment to service. Tomorrow would bring final rehearsals, last-minute adjustments, and the growing tension that always preceded momentous events. But tonight, the king allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The decision was made, the preparations were complete, and the future beckoned with unprecedented possibility. The private dining room at Buckingham Palace had never felt quite so charged with emotion as it did on this crisp February evening. King Charles had requested a family dinner, but everyone present understood this was no ordinary gathering. The mahogany table, which had hosted countless royal meals over the decades, tonight bore witness to conversations that would reshape the Windsor dynasty forever. Prince William arrived first, his usual composed demeanor barely masking the tension he had carried since learning of his father's intentions. Catherine had chosen to remain at home with the children, understanding that this evening required the kind of frank family discussion that was better conducted without the presence of in-laws. However, beloved, William's relationship with his father had evolved significantly over the years, moving from the formal distance of his youth to a genuine partnership in royal duties. Princess Anne entered with her characteristic brisk efficiency, having driven herself from Gatcombe Park despite the palace's offer to provide transportation. Her practical nature had always been one of her greatest strengths, and tonight that quality would be essential. She had already made it clear to her brother that she supported his decision in principle, though she remained concerned about the practical implications for the family's workload and public perception. Prince Edward arrived with Sophie, the couple having discussed extensively what Charles might be planning to announce. As the youngest of the late Queen's children, Edward had often felt the pressure of living up to his siblings' accomplishments while carving out his own role within the royal structure. His perspective on the changes his brother was contemplating brought a valuable viewpoint to the family discussion. The Queen consort took her place at the table with the quiet dignity that had characterized her approach to royal life. Camilla's journey from controversial figure to beloved family member had given her unique insights into public opinion and the monarchy's relationship with the British people. Her support for Charles's decision was unwavering, but she also understood better than most the challenges that lay ahead. Prince Andrew's absence was notable and deliberate. The ongoing controversies surrounding him had made his participation in such a sensitive family discussion inadvisable. His exclusion served as a reminder of how personal scandals could affect the entire institution, reinforcing the importance of the changes Charles was preparing to implement. The conversation began quietly, with Charles acknowledging the unusual nature of their gathering and the significance of what he was about to share with the broader family. He had already informed William and of his general intentions, but tonight was about discussing the detailed implications and ensuring everyone understood their roles in the transition period that would follow his announcement. William listened intently as his father outlined the specific changes he intended to implement. The heir apparent's questions were thoughtful and sometimes challenging, reflecting his understanding that he would inherit not just the crown, but also the consequences of any decisions made during his father's reign. His primary concern was ensuring continuity of service to the British people during what would inevitably be a period of adjustment. Princess Anne's contributions to the discussion were characteristically direct and practical. She wanted to understand exactly how royal duties would be redistributed, what additional responsibilities she might need to undertake, and how the changes would affect the financial structure of the monarchy. Her lifelong commitment to public service meant she was prepared to adapt to whatever new arrangements were required. Prince Edward raised questions about the Commonwealth implications of his brother's announcement. As someone who had worked extensively with youth organizations across the former empire, he understood how important the monarchy's symbolic role remained in many nations. His concern was ensuring that progressive changes in Britain didn't inadvertently damage relationships with Commonwealth realms that might prefer more traditional approaches. Sophie's perspective, as someone who had married into the royal family, provided valuable insights into public expectations and media reactions. Her own experience of adapting to royal life had taught her about the challenges of balancing personal authenticity with institutional requirements. She strongly supported the direction Charles was taking, seeing it as essential for the monarchy's long-term survival. The Queen Consort shared her observations from conversations with ordinary citizens during recent royal engagements. The British public, she reported, seemed increasingly interested in seeing the monarchy adapt to contemporary values while maintaining its historical dignity. Young people, in particular, were looking for leadership that acknowledged modern realities rather than simply preserving ancient traditions. As the evening progressed, the conversation became more personal and emotional. Charles spoke about his experience in the hospital and how it had clarified his thinking about legacy and responsibility. He acknowledged that his announcement would be controversial and potentially divisive, but he believed it was necessary for the institution's long-term health and relevance. William expressed his admiration for his father's courage in making such a difficult decision, while also voicing his concerns about the immediate challenges they would face. The media attention would be intense, and there would inevitably be criticism from traditionalists who preferred stability over change. His own preparation for eventual kingship had always assumed a more gradual evolution of the monarchy's role and methods. Princess Anne shared stories from her decades of royal service, illustrating how the monarchy had already changed dramatically since her youth. The formality and distance that had characterized royal life in the 1950s and 1960s had given way to more accessible and relatable approaches. Charles's announcement, she suggested, was simply the next step in that ongoing evolution. The discussion of Harry's absence was painful, but necessary. The estrangement between Charles and his younger son had been one of the most difficult challenges of the king's reign. While Harry would be informed of the announcement through official channels, the family gathered around the table all felt the sadness of his exclusion from such an important family moment. Prince Edward spoke about the younger generation's perspective on the monarchy, sharing insights from his work with young people across Britain and the Commonwealth. The institution's relevance to people under 30 was increasingly questioned, he reported, not because they rejected the concept of monarchy, but because they wanted to see it demonstrate greater connection to contemporary values and challenges. The financial implications of Charles's decision were discussed in detail, with Sophie raising practical questions about how the changes would affect the sovereign grant and other funding mechanisms. The king assured the family that extensive consultation with Treasury officials had ensured that the transition would be budget neutral, while potentially offering long-term savings to taxpayers. As dinner concluded, the conversation turned to the immediate aftermath of the announcement. Each family member would need to be prepared for increased media attention and public scrutiny. William, as heir apparent, would face particular pressure to comment on his father's decision and its implications for his own future reign. The Queen Consort reminded everyone that the British people had consistently shown their ability to adapt to change when it was presented thoughtfully and with clear benefits. The key would be communicating the positive aspects of the announcement while acknowledging legitimate concerns and criticisms. Charles concluded the evening by expressing his gratitude for his family's support and understanding. The decision he was making would affect all of them, and their unity in facing the challenges ahead would be crucial. The Windsor family had weathered many storms over the decades, and this announcement, while unprecedented, would be another test of their resilience and adaptability. As family members departed into the London night, each carrying their own thoughts and concerns about what the coming days would bring, the bonds between them felt stronger despite the magnitude of the changes ahead. The palace corridors that had witnessed so much royal history were about to echo with the footsteps of a family walking confidently into an uncertain but promising future. The private secretaries and protection officers who had discreetly maintained their positions throughout the evening understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The royal family's ability to discuss such momentous changes with candor and mutual support demonstrated the personal strength that had sustained the monarchy through decades of public and private challenges. In the quiet moments after the last car had departed, Charles and Camilla walked through the staterooms that would soon witness his historic announcement. The weight of centuries of royal history surrounded them, but so did the promise of renewal and adaptation. The conversation with his family had reinforced his confidence that the changes he was planning would strengthen rather than weaken the institution he had sworn to serve. The palace settled into its nighttime routine, but the energy of transformation lingered in every room. History was being written not just in grand speeches and official proclamations, but in quiet family conversations where love, duty, and vision combined to create the foundation for a new era. Tomorrow would bring the final preparations for an announcement that would change everything, but tonight had confirmed that the royal family was ready to face that future together. The throne room at Buckingham Palace had been transformed into a modern television studio, though the ancient grandeur remained unchanged. Technicians moved quietly among the ornate furniture and priceless artwork, setting up cameras and lighting equipment with a reverence typically reserved for sacred spaces. This room, which had witnessed coronations, state banquets, and countless moments of royal ceremony, would now host what many historians would later describe as the most significant royal address since the abdication crisis of 1936. King Charles stood before the massive gilt mirror that dominated one wall, adjusting his tie with hands that showed only the slightest tremor. The morning had been filled with final preparations, last-minute briefings, and quiet moments of reflection. Now, as the afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, the moment he had been preparing for had finally arrived. The weight of the crown seemed lighter somehow, perhaps because he was about to share its burden in an entirely new way. In television control rooms across London, producers and directors prepared for what they knew would be the most-watched royal broadcast in decades. The BBC, ITV, Sky News, and dozens of international networks had cleared their schedules to carry the King's address live. Social media platforms had prepared for the surge of traffic that would inevitably follow, while news organizations around the world held their front pages and opening segments for what was about to unfold. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak sat in his office at number 10, having received his final briefing just 2 hours earlier. The constitutional implications of the king's announcement had required careful consideration by the government's legal advisors, but the prime minister was prepared to offer his full support for what he recognized as a visionary step toward modernizing the monarchy. His own statement, carefully coordinated with the palace, would be released immediately following the royal address. At Westminster Abbey, the Archbishop of Canterbury concluded his afternoon prayers with particular focus on wisdom and guidance for the monarch he served. The spiritual dimensions of the king's announcement have been the subject of extensive discussion between the two men, resulting in a theological framework that supported progressive change within traditional structures. The Archbishop's blessing would be crucial for maintaining the support of the faithful during the transition period. Across the Commonwealth, governors-general and prime ministers gathered around television screens or prepared to watch live streams of the address. The king's decision would affect constitutional arrangements from Canada to Australia, requiring careful consideration of how the changes might be adapted to different political systems and cultural contexts. Early indications suggested broad support for the direction the king was taking, though implementation would vary significantly across different realms. In the throne room, the king took his position behind the lectern that had been carefully positioned to capture the room's majestic atmosphere while ensuring optimal camera angles. Behind him, the throne itself remained empty, but symbolic, representing both the continuity of royal tradition and the new approaches to exercising royal authority that were about to be unveiled. The queen consort watched from a small anteroom, her presence providing the emotional support Charles needed while avoiding any distraction from his message. Their eyes met briefly as the final countdown began, a moment of silent communication that spoke volumes about the partnership that had sustained them through this period of difficult decision-making and careful preparation. Prince William stood in his own drawing room at Kensington Palace, surrounded by his family despite the early evening hour. Catherine had ensured that the children understood they were witnessing an important moment in their family's history, though the full implications would only become clear to them in years to come. As heir apparent, William felt the weight of future responsibility shifting subtly, but significantly as his father prepared to speak. The television countdown reached 0, and King Charles III began his address to the nation and Commonwealth with words that would be analyzed and debated for decades to come. His voice was steady and warm, conveying both the gravity of his announcement and his confidence in the path forward. The speech had been crafted to speak directly to ordinary citizens while acknowledging the constitutional complexity of the changes he was proposing. He began by reflecting on his recent hospital stay and how it had provided time for contemplation about service, legacy, and the evolving needs of modern society. The monarchy, he explained, had always been at its strongest when it adapted to changing times while maintaining its core commitment to serving the people. Today's announcement represented exactly that kind of evolution. The king then outlined his decision to establish what he termed a co-monarchy structure, sharing royal duties and decision-making authority with Prince William in an unprecedented arrangement that would prepare the heir apparent for eventual full responsibility while allowing for more dynamic and responsive royal leadership. This would not be a regency, he emphasized, but rather a new model of shared constitutional monarchy designed for the challenges of the 21st century. Under this arrangement, both father and son would carry full royal authority in their respective areas of responsibility. The king would focus particularly on international relations, Commonwealth affairs, and environmental initiatives, while Prince William would take primary responsibility for domestic constitutional duties, youth engagement, and modernization efforts. Both would continue to undertake the ceremonial and symbolic functions that connected the monarchy to British life. The announcement sent immediate shockwaves through the political establishment and media commentators who scrambled to understand the constitutional implications of such an unprecedented arrangement. Legal experts were called upon to explain how shared monarchy might function in practice, while historians search for precedents in the long story of British royal evolution. Charles continued his address by acknowledging that this decision would face criticism and skepticism. Change, he observed, was never easy for institutions steeped in tradition. However, he expressed his firm belief that the monarchy's greatest service to future generations lay not in rigid preservation of past practices, but in thoughtful adaptation to contemporary needs and expectations. The environmental crisis received particular attention in his remarks, with the king explaining how the new arrangement would allow him to speak more forcefully on climate issues while ensuring that constitutional neutrality was maintained in other areas. The co-monarchy structure would permit more specialized focus on different challenges while maintaining the unity and continuity that made the monarchy effective. Prince William, he announced, had enthusiastically embraced this new role and had been preparing intensively for the additional responsibilities it would entail. The heir apparent would address the nation separately the following day, outlining his vision for how the co-monarchy would function and his commitment to serving the British people with the same dedication that had characterized the Windsor dynasty for over a century. The Commonwealth implications were addressed directly, with Charles explaining that the new arrangement would strengthen rather than weaken the monarchy's ability to serve as a unifying force across diverse nations and cultures. The increased capacity for royal engagement that would result from shared responsibilities would benefit Commonwealth relations and provide more opportunities for meaningful cooperation on shared challenges. As the address neared its conclusion, the king spoke personally about his love for the British people and his determination to use his remaining years of service as effectively as possible. The co-monarchy was not a step toward abdication, he emphasized, but rather an enhancement of royal capability designed to meet the complex demands of modern leadership. His final words were directed particularly at young people, acknowledging their concerns about traditional institutions and their desire for leadership that reflected their values and aspirations. The monarchy's future, he declared, lay in proving its continued relevance through service, innovation, and unwavering commitment to the common good. As the cameras stopped rolling and the throne room began to empty, King Charles remained at the lectern for a moment, processing the magnitude of what he had just accomplished. The announcement was now public, irreversible, and certain to generate intense debate and discussion. But he felt a profound sense of relief and anticipation, knowing that he had chosen a path forward rather than simply accepting the constraints of tradition. The immediate response was electric. Social media exploded with commentary, ranging from enthusiastic support to bewildered criticism. Traditional monarchists expressed concern about departing from established practice, while progressive voices praised the king's willingness to innovate. International media began analyzing the global implications of what was quickly being termed the Windsor Revolution. Within hours, opinion polls would show a nation divided, but intrigued by their monarch's bold decision. The co-monarchy concept, while unprecedented, seemed to capture something many people had been hoping for without quite knowing how to articulate it. The promise of more dynamic and responsive royal leadership resonated particularly strongly with younger demographics who had previously shown declining interest in the monarchy. As night fell over London, the palace switchboards were overwhelmed with calls from media organizations, foreign governments, and ordinary citizens eager to understand what the king's announcement meant for them. The constitutional machinery of government worked through the night to address the practical implications, while legal experts debated the theoretical foundations of shared monarchy. The king retired to his private apartments, knowing that he had fundamentally changed the institution he had spent his entire life preparing to lead. The co-monarchy was more than just a new arrangement of royal duties. It was a statement of faith in the monarchy's ability to evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character and commitment to service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and countless questions about implementation, but Tonight, Charles allowed himself to feel the satisfaction of having made a decision that future generations would judge as either visionary or reckless. Either way, the monarchy would never be quite the same again, and that transformation had begun with words spoken in a throne room on a February afternoon when a king chose change over continuity. 6 months after the announcement that shocked the world, the co-monarchy had settled into a rhythm that surprised even its architects with its effectiveness. The initial chaos of constitutional lawyers scrambling to interpret unprecedented arrangements had given way to a new normal that seemed to energize both the royal family and the British public. The fears of confusion and conflict that had dominated early commentary proved largely unfounded as the two kings developed a working relationship that enhanced rather than complicated royal functions. The first major test had come during the state visit of the French president just 3 weeks after the announcement. Traditional protocol had been thrown into uncertainty as officials struggled to determine how a co-monarchy should handle the elaborate ceremonial requirements of such occasions. The solution that emerged became a template for future arrangements. King Charles handled the diplomatic and international aspects, while Prince William managed domestic media and public engagement elements. The French president later described the visit as the most dynamic royal engagement he had ever experienced, with both monarchs bringing their distinct perspectives and expertise to different aspects of the relationship. The success of this early test helped establish the credibility of the new arrangement and demonstrated that innovation could enhance rather than diminish royal effectiveness. The environmental movement had been among the most immediate beneficiaries of the changed royal structure. King Charles, freed from some of the constitutional constraints that had previously limited his advocacy, had delivered a series of speeches on climate change that generated global attention and genuine policy discussions. His address to the United Nations Climate Summit in September had been particularly powerful, combining royal authority with passionate advocacy in a way that previous monarchs could never have achieved. Meanwhile, Prince William had thrown himself into the domestic aspects of royal duty with an energy that impressed even veteran palace observers. His focus on youth engagement and social mobility had produced innovative programs that connected the monarchy to contemporary concerns in unprecedented ways. The Future Forward initiative he launched had created partnerships between the royal household and technology companies, educational institutions, and social entrepreneurs. The public response to the co-monarchy had been more positive than early polls suggested it might be. While traditionalist segments remained skeptical, younger demographics embraced the innovation enthusiastically. University students, who had previously shown little interest in royal affairs, began attending William's public appearances in large numbers. The monarchy's social media following had doubled, driven largely by content featuring the younger king's activities. The Commonwealth had also adapted remarkably well to the new arrangement. Governor-generals, initially worried about protocol confusion, had discovered that having two active monarchs actually improved the royal family's ability to maintain connections across the diverse realm. King Charles's experience and international standing combined with Prince William's fresh approach and contemporary perspective to create a more comprehensive royal presence. Australia's Prime Minister had been among the first to publicly praise the co-monarchy, describing it as exactly the kind of evolution that made the constitutional monarchy more relevant to modern democracies. The arrangement had helped defuse Republican sentiment in several Commonwealth nations by demonstrating that the monarchy could innovate and adapt rather than simply preserve outdated traditions. The relationship between father and son had deepened significantly during their months of shared responsibility. Palace staff reported observing frequent consultations between the two kings, characterized by mutual respect and genuine collaboration. The fears that two strong personalities might clash over authority or approach had proved unfounded, as both men focused on complementing rather than competing with each other's strengths. Queen Camilla had emerged as a crucial figure in making the arrangement work smoothly. Her diplomatic skills and understanding of both men's personalities had helped navigate the inevitable moments of tension or uncertainty. Catherine, now effectively a queen consort herself, had also adapted impressively to her elevated role, bringing a contemporary perspective that resonated particularly well with young families. The media coverage had evolved from sensational speculation to serious analysis of how the co-monarchy was changing both the institution and the country's relationship with it. International journalists flocked to London to observe this unique constitutional experiment, with many countries beginning to consider how similar innovations might apply to their own governmental structures. The financial implications had proved even more positive than projected. The ability to divide royal duties more efficiently had actually reduced overall costs while increasing the monarchy's reach and impact. The sovereign grant for the following year would be the first in decades to show a real reduction, a development that impressed fiscally conservative critics who had initially opposed the arrangement. Prince Harry's relationship with his family had shown signs of gradual improvement, though the process remained delicate and private. The co-monarchy had created new possibilities for healing old wounds, particularly as it demonstrated the family's commitment to evolution and growth rather than rigid adherence to past grievances. The legal frameworks supporting the co-monarchy had required extensive development, but constitutional experts had created structures that satisfied both traditionalist concerns and progressive aspirations. The arrangement had actually clarified rather than confused several ambiguous aspects of royal authority, creating more transparent and accountable systems for exercising constitutional functions. Children across Britain had become more interested in learning about their constitutional system, with teachers reporting increased engagement in civics lessons that explained how the co-monarchy functioned. The innovation had made abstract constitutional concepts more accessible and interesting to young learners who might previously have dismissed royal institutions as irrelevant to their lives. International relations had benefited significantly from having two monarchs available for different types of engagement. While King Charles handled traditional diplomatic functions with a gravitas that came from decades of experience, Prince William had proved particularly effective at connecting with younger foreign leaders and emerging democracies seeking to modernize their own institutions. The environmental initiatives that had flourished under the new arrangement were beginning to show concrete results. King Charles's enhanced advocacy had contributed to stronger international climate agreements, while Prince William's domestic focus had accelerated adoption of sustainable technologies and practices across Britain. The royal example had inspired both governmental and private sector innovations. The cultural impact of the co-monarchy extended far beyond constitutional matters. British fashion, architecture, and design had all responded to the energy of innovation that the royal change had symbolized. The country felt more confident about embracing change while maintaining its heritage, a balance that the co-monarchy embodied perfectly. Regional development had also benefited from the new arrangement. With two active monarchs available for public engagements, previously underserved areas of the country had received more royal attention. Northern England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland had all seen increased royal visits and investment in local initiatives. The success of the co-monarchy had begun to influence other constitutional monarchies around the world. Several European royal houses were privately studying the British innovation, considering how similar arrangements might strengthen their own institutions. The Windsor family had once again demonstrated its ability to lead royal evolution rather than simply follow established patterns. As winter approached, and the first anniversary of King Charles's hospital stay drew near, both monarchs reflected on the transformation that had begun with a health scare and evolved into a fundamental reimagining of royal service. The co-monarchy had exceeded even their optimistic expectations, creating new possibilities for effective leadership while maintaining the continuity and stability that made monarchy valuable. The British people had embraced their unique constitutional arrangement with characteristic pragmatism and good humor. Opinion polls showed consistent majority support for the co-monarchy, with particular enthusiasm among demographics that had previously been skeptical of royal institutions. The monarchy had become more rather than less relevant to contemporary life. Looking toward the future, both kings felt confident that they had created something lasting and valuable. The co-monarchy was not just a temporary arrangement, but a new model of constitutional monarchy that could serve Britain well for decades to come. They had proved that innovation and tradition could strengthen rather than weaken each other when combined thoughtfully and courageously. The palace corridors that had witnessed so much royal history now echoed with the footsteps of a transformed institution. The future looked brighter because two kings had chosen to share rather than hoard the responsibilities of the crown, creating a legacy that would inspire and guide generations of British leaders yet to come. The Windsor Revolution had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, proving that even the most ancient institutions could adapt and thrive when led by wisdom, courage, and an unwavering commitment to service.